I'm Kiki Thompson, and I was born in Geneva, which is the link to Switzerland, basically. And from there, we moved from Geneva to London, London to New York. And I grew up in New York, and then went to university in England, and then came back to Verbier. While I was in England, my parents bought a chalet in Verbier. So I spent my vacations here skiing and snowboarding, and then came here for my first winter in 1991. I did several seasons skiing and snowboarding, and then went on to the World Cup circuit. And after that, I came back to what I studied in England, which was art and French, and sculpted. And then in 2010, I went on an artist residency in New York at the School of Visual Arts. And Madeleine Paterneau, who is a painter, was also there doing a painting residency. And that is where we came up with the idea of Verbier 3D. So Verbier 3D, we are a non-profit organization, and the idea behind it was to have a sculpture park in Verbier that was built by an artist residency, but involving the community and education for children. We have every other year now, we have an artist residency that's 6 weeks long, 5 weeks for creating the work, and 1 week for installation. Being an artist in residence at the School of Visual Arts in the public art residency was had a huge influence on creating Verbier 3D, just because it made me realize that it was possible. When Madeleine Paterneau and I were discussing it, we thought it could be done, and there was no reason why we couldn't have a residency in Verbier as well. So as a resident, we also saw how the residency was run. So in the main board of directors, there's it's mostly made up of artists and curators. So there's Madeleine, who's a painter, myself, who's a sculptor, then Carrie Jane Lowry, who is a photographer, who was based in Switzerland. She's now based in Tel Aviv in Israel. There's Paul Goodwin, who used to be the curator of contemporary art for Tate Britain, and he's based in London. And Elena Simone, who is also a gallery director and curator of African art, and she's based in New York. So we've all sort of come together to create Verbier 3D. The New York side, we've created now a Verbier 3D New York as well, to have events in New York to promote Verbier 3D in Switzerland. I would say that Verbier, for me, is a very cosmopolitan ski resort. That is now moving in a direction of culture. So, for instance, in the summer, there's the Verbier Festival. The people who come in the summer for the Verbier Festival are very different to the people who come to ski in the winter. But there's always generally, I would say, people who come from different backgrounds, but generally quite affluent community. There are many art collectors. There's royalty who comes to Verbier. There's celebrities who live and visit Verbier. But I think the main reason why they like coming to Verbier is because no one cares who they are. It's more, the mountain is the most important thing, and everyone is there, and it puts everyone on the same page. The choice of site. Well, Verbier is my home, and I absolutely adore the place. So that it couldn't be anywhere else. And Madeline would say the same, even though she's based in New York now. And as far as the actual place for the sculpture park, when we discussed with Verbier our idea that we wanted to put, originally we thought we would put sculptures on the old concrete bases of where the lifts had been. And so as you were taking the lift up in the winter, you would suddenly see a sculpture, or if you were skiing down, you would ski past a sculpture. And they decided, which I thought was a very smart move from them, it was their choice to put it between Ruinette and La Chaux. And the reason for that is that is a place that can be accessed year-round. So the sculpture park is easily accessible in the summer and in the winter. If the sculptures had been up the mountain on old concrete bases, they would have never been seen in the summer. Okay, so primarily we're a residency and sculpture park. So we have the 6-week invited residency, where we invite artists to come to Verbier to create monumental pieces for the sculpture park. Each artist is asked to donate 1 day of their residency to teaching, and that may be definitely teaching a workshop for children based around their own artist practice. Then they also this year will be doing art critiques to the master classes that we'll be having for the paid residencies. So we will have a series of paid residencies, each 2 weeks long, perhaps 2 that are 1 week long. And the resident artists will be spending time with the paying artists. And we also have panel discussions to discuss contemporary art and different issues in the art world today. Initially, the criteria was the artist had to have exhibited in a museum, had some international experience, and ideally worked on a large scale in their sculpture. In terms of actual experience of the artists when they came here, I would say, for instance, Zach Ove, who did Elephant Walk. That is the largest sculpture he's ever done. We noticed in the past that with the, especially the American artists who had never been to Switzerland before and had never seen real mountains, that they spent at least a week wondering, scratching their head, wondering what they were going to do, and often they changed their projects. They wasted a lot of time, and it wasn't their fault. It was just they wasted a lot of time because they arrived here and it was not at all what they expected. So now what we've done is we've become biennial with our residencies, and we invite especially the international artists to come in the off year, and we have an event surrounding them to introduce them to Verbier and also introduce Verbier to them. So people from the local community can meet them and ask them questions. We can have panel discussions and events and video screenings, and that also gives them a chance to visit the park prior to the residency. Yes and no. One of the Valaisan, État du Valais sponsorships is based on Valaisan artists being involved. One of the reasons why we haven't been sponsored by Pro Helvetia, which we hope to be this year, is we haven't had Swiss artists from different language regions to come to the residency. So that's one of their criteria. So yeah, you have to fit the criteria, but not change your plan at the same time. So. I don't think that you can ever satisfy the public with whoever you choose as an artist. So I don't think that is a huge basis on our choice of artists. Our main choice of artists is we're moving up the scale, up the ladder, to get to a higher and higher level of artist. We're already working with Ilya and Amelia Kabakov, who next year will be in Monumenta. So that's almost as high as you can go. With them, we're doing separate projects. We're not doing a project in the park per se, but we're hoping to have a sculpture of theirs in Verbier. With the other artists, you could never invite someone like Anish Kapoor to do a residency because A, he doesn't have time, and B, he has a studio where he has his assistants and they make the work for him. So he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't be interested. But maybe in the future we could have him come and do a talk. We could have him come and do a master class, something along those lines, in exchange for exhibiting one of his pieces in the park. So that's where we're looking. Actually, yes. So, for instance, Julien Marolf, he did a sculpture called Macro et Cadre Doré, and it was made out of concrete, and it was based on Maurice Chapat's book Les Hautes Cimes. And Maurice Chapat talked about bétonnage des Alpes, so the concreting building in the Alps, and it was a direct reflection of the vote that had gone through in terms of the Lex Weber and construction, second homes, etc. And I think the thing that I love most about it, apart from I love the sculpture itself, his price, the price for the sculpture is based on the square meter price in Verbier. Yeah. I think you're asking the wrong person because I think that if there are any negative remarks that they won't necessarily tell me to my face, and any positive remarks, yes, I have heard lots of positive remarks about the park, but I do know, of course, there are negative remarks, and probably the main one is, oh, the English have done it again. They've started up a business, and there's no Swiss. Well, actually, I am Swiss, and Madeleine is Swiss, but we just happen to be anglophone. But there you go. But otherwise, I think it's evolving. I hope it's evolving anyway. I think people are becoming more open to public art. Certainly, we had a day in the park this summer, which was a bit by chance, but there were 5,000 people up for the Fête de Famille at La Chaux, and lift, the télécabine from La Chaux up to Rinette broke down, so everyone had to walk through the park. So it was good to see people interact with the sculptures, and I think the children particularly like it. For me, community-based art is precisely that, involving the community as much as possible. So our studio space during the residency is in a tent, and we have an open door policy. So on weekends, the last. Not the very last weekend because that's the vernissage, but the sort of last 3 weekends of the residency, we invite the general public to come in, and we have mini events, a little apéro, and it gives them a chance to see the work in progress, to meet the artists, to discuss what's happening, to talk about where their piece is going to be in the park, and to understand what their piece is about. And for me, this is very important, because if we didn't have that, people would go to the park, and especially people from here, and start scratching their head and saying, well, what is this thing doing here? It doesn't make any sense. So that's part of it. And the other part is having the artists teach the children about their practice. So have the children learn about contemporary art as well. And then the panel discussions as well. During the residencies, we definitely create work for locals. We use local businesses for materials, for creating the sculptures, for installing the sculptures. We use local people who, it's during a time when a lot of people who are here don't have much work, because it's between May and the beginning of July. So it's in a very sort of slow period in Verbier. So yes, in that sense, we do definitely, we hire people, and I mean, I'd like to think that we pay lots of money, but we really don't. We like to, at the start of each residency, each artist visits the sculpture park, and they choose a site for their sculpture. So each sculpture is site-specific. And so in terms of a rhythm, it's not really a curated park per se, although it's curated by the artists, because the artists create that dialogue between the mountain and their own sculpture. So to give you an example, Donna Dodson has a pregnant stork, and that stork she chose to put on a bit that juts out below the path, and instead of facing the park, she decided to have it facing out, so it looked like it was about to take flight into the Valais. Similar ideas, Josette Taramarca with her Arche, and again, it looks like the boat is about to launch into the Valais. Then there's the elephant above the path, and again, it's the same thing. The elephant's looking out and sort of overseeing the mountains and kind of guarding. Yeah, I think so. I think it's I mean, it's going back to the idea of public art, or sculpture in general. A sculpture takes in general, the definition of a sculpture is it's a three-dimensional form that takes a space, and because it's taking a space, it's changing the space around it, or it's making you more aware of your surroundings by looking at that sculpture. And to place a sculpture up the mountain is quite a challenge, because you have to make something minimum 4 meters high to have any impact, or you have to place it in such a way that it creates a dialogue with the mountain itself to have any impact. So if you go to the sculpture park, some of the sculptures work, some don't. Those other sculptures, I'm not saying that they are unsuccessful sculptures, but I think they are sculptures that could be placed somewhere else and still be a good sculpture. Some of the sculptures there, if they were placed somewhere else, would lose their meaning, if that makes sense. I think it has to be part of, with respect to the monumentality of the landscape, because you can't avoid it in the park. You're standing amongst, it's like a Friedrich painting basically. You're standing on this mountain and you see this incredible vast view of all these other mountains, and you're just this tiny little dot on the landscape, and it's absolutely with respect to the monumentality of the mountains. I think my initial definition of monumental art would be something on a large scale, something that is imposing. My definition now of monumental art is it doesn't have to be imposing, but it can still be on a large scale, and it can still have some form of impact on the person who is experiencing it. Maybe not the sculpture park. Maybe I think more each individual piece rather than the sculpture park as a whole. But I mean, I think that it does have a certain. It does draw attention to people who are looking at a sculpture without you can't look at a sculpture without looking at where it's placed. And so, yes, you do look at the place slightly differently. For me, I think of Christo and the way he does his work. And so he will, for instance, wrap the Pont Neuf in Paris, and it will be wrapped for 2 weeks, and people will walk across it and they will see it, and then they'll look at it in a different way because it looks different, and then the wrapping is taken away. But no one will ever, anyone who's experienced walking across the Pont Neuf as a wrapped bridge, they'll never be able to walk across that bridge without thinking of Christo's wrapping. So it's a similar thing up here. You have a sculpture, and it's creating that interaction. You're suddenly forcing the person to look at the environment that they're in and to think of themselves as well. It's your place in the environment as much as the sculpture's place is in the environment, as much as the environment itself. I think that we have developed organically in terms of the way we are changing, we ourselves are mutating with what we're showing. There was no way that we could have done video art or installation in the first year, because it went so quickly. I mean, the first email that Madeline and I had, or the first meeting that we had about the idea, was in July of 2010. And by May, we started our first residency in 2011. So it was incredibly fast. So I think it's more in terms of development, moving on into becoming more contemporary art. I mean, I think, yes, you can have an object, but at what point does that object lose its interest? So or how does that object continue to have some form of interaction with the spectator? And how can that object be interactive as well? So so then if you think in terms of a video, or you think of in terms of an installation, perhaps an installation more than a video, installations tend to be a little bit more interactive. You tend to have to walk through them. You tend to have to be a part of it in one way or another. To redefine ourselves in terms of changing from monumentalism to more contemporary art-based projects. No, I don't think that it's changing our project at all. In fact, I think it's just strengthening what we already do. Our main goals are education and to inform the public about what contemporary art is, and to have that interaction with the community and with the mountains as well. So no, I don't think that it will change. I difficult. I would say in terms of sculpture, for me, I would say Josette Taramarca's Arche would be probably the most emblematic, because it has a sense of place. I don't think it's completely 100% the right choice, because she made it in her studio and wasn't part of the residency. I think Julien Marolf, his sculpture, because of the locality of the theme, and the fact that he actually did spend every weekend in Verbier talking to people, making his sculpture, discussing, teaching the children, I would almost say his piece would be more emblematic of Verbier 3D, especially as he's Valaisan. He was a part of the residency. He was and he doesn't speak any English at all, but he still interacted 100% with the non-French speaking residents. So I would probably choose his. Again, it's creating that dialogue between the sculpture, between the art and nature. So the truth of nature, as opposed to being true to nature, the truth of nature is the fact that I could be in the park one day and I could see absolutely nothing because there's a cloud covering everything, or I could be there another day and there's this enormous, vast grandeur. Another day it's bright green, another day it's covered in snow, and all I see is the sculptures, so it's like being in a gallery. So I think there's a constant back and forth between the actual art and the nature itself. I think so. I mean, I think, Paul Goodwin is the one who coined the phrase for us, the museum without walls. So we are still a museum without walls, and I think once there's snow everywhere, you get more of that sort of gallery feel. but it's still, you can never, we're not in a white cube at all. It is like land art. It is art in context. It is art that's in a place. You can't get away from that. That's where we are. We're a sculpture park.